Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. We are slowly inching our way closer to 200 subscribers, so I just want to say thank you to everyone who's decided to join me on this journey. I'm thankful for all of you. Today I wanted to talk about the much anticipated Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I'm a huge fan of the first two films, and I was very interested to see how James Gunn would wrap up the trilogy. The synopsis is as follows. Still reeling from the loss of Gamora, Peter Quill must rally his team to defend the universe and protect one of their own. If the mission is not completed successfully, it could possibly lead to the end of the Guardians as we know them. So without further ado, let's get into the 6 things that make a movie great. 1. The plot. Upon this movie's open, we find Peter Quill drunk, sad, and depressed as a result of the Gamora that came back during Endgame not being his Gamora. She doesn't want any part of his love or the Guardians, and that's left him in a pretty dark place. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, a golden shiny power boy body tackles Rocket and proceeds to put the beat down on the Guardians. They fight him off and he's unable to capture Rocket, but he triggered a failsafe device in Rocket's heart that will kill him in 48 hours. So the Guardians have to rally together, go find the information they need to deactivate this failsafe, and take down the people that created Rocket. Granted, the first half of this movie is a lot weaker than the second half. It's kind of convoluted and random at parts, and the audience finds themselves being reminded by Peter like 3 or 4 different times, hey guys, we're here to save Rocket and get the information we need. And I wasn't sure if he was doing that for the audience or if he was doing that to remind James Gunn what the point of this movie was. But the second half of this movie got on track pretty quickly, and it ended up playing out pretty well. I will say the most disappointing part of this movie for me was the very neglected subplot of Adam Warlock. I am personally of the belief that as soon as Adam Warlock was introduced at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy 2, that he should have played the role that Captain Marvel did in Infinity War and Endgame. He actually has a really interesting story arc with Thanos, and I wish they would have done something about that instead of shoehorning in Captain Marvel. But I digress. The point is that I thought Adam Warlock was going to be a much bigger part of this movie than he actually was. But on the bright side, I will say that having the High Evolutionary as the main villain made this movie really good. There is a clear-cut evil here, and all those things put together made the story of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 one that was very enjoyable. So for me, plot gets a thumbs up. 2 is family friendliness. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is rated PG-13, but this movie is extremely violent. There's blood, there's gore. A lot of the stuff having to do with the High Evolutionary is very dark, both in concept and what you see on screen. There's animal abuse, there's mild profanity throughout, and they drop an unnecessary F-bomb near the end of this movie. And honestly, it was a kind of funny moment, but it really felt out of place for a Marvel movie. So for me, family friendliness gets a thumbs down. 3 is acting and script. All the acting performances in this movie were great. Chris Pratt was classic Star-Lord, Zoe Saldana did a great job playing this alternate version of Gamora, and Karen Gillan, Dave Bautista, and Pom Klementieff all had really good acting performances that I enjoyed. Chakudi Awuji also did a great job playing the High Evolutionary, being this really messed up, unstable, and volatile character. It also made me really happy to see Nathan Fillion in this movie again, and I even saw Molly Quinn make an appearance. Big Castle fan, so that made me extremely happy. And the script of this movie was pretty great. I do think in the first half of this movie they were trying too hard to be funny, and that led to a lot of random moments that led to Peter having to remind the audience what they were there for in the first place. But this movie was naturally funny in a lot of moments. Dialogue between characters was hilarious at times, and there's a good balance of moments that go from being really funny to something that just really pulls on your heart. So I thought they did a good job with that. One thing I wanted to mention that I don't normally talk about is the composed music. Guardians of the Galaxy 1 and 2 were composed by Tyler Bates, but Guardians of the Galaxy 3 was composed by John Murphy. And I have to say, there is a noticeable difference. It seemed that the music scores in this movie and the moments they chose to use them in were a lot more random and didn't feel as natural as the first 2 movies. It was pretty noticeable, but it didn't ruin the movie for me. So for me, acting and script get a thumbs up. 4 is character development. Most of the character development in this movie surrounds Rocket. Through a series of continual flashbacks, we get to see Rocket when he was first created, him growing and being this creation of the High Evolutionary. And it fills in a lot of the missing pieces to Rocket's backstory. Everyone else in this movie has decent character development as well, but I think my favorite character arc was probably Drax. I think his character arc and where they brought it to by the end of this film was one of my favorite that I've seen in a while. I also like the High Evolutionary. One, I like that they made him absolutely evil. Two, you find that he is a little bit crazy, so it makes him a really sadistic but effective villain. Just a little shout out, I also really like their use of Cosmo the Space Dog. At first I thought it was going to be a gimmick, but they actually used Cosmo more, and that was pretty cool. But not cool because they used Cosmo more than Adam freaking Warlock. You give and you take, Marvel. I would have really liked them to develop Adam Warlock's character more in this movie, and there's some very tragic things that happen to him in this film that they kind of just gloss over and don't talk about. So we'll just have to see what they do in the future, because they dropped the ball with Adam Warlock in this movie. But for all intents and purposes, I have to give character development a thumbs up. 5 is visuals and CGI. All the visuals and CGI in this movie were great. The Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy are very colorful movies that incorporate a lot of random and strange looking things, but they do it in a way that doesn't spill into Uncanny Valley. And the action sequences in this movie were very entertaining. They did use slow-mo quite a bit, but I don't feel like they went overboard with it. So for me, visuals and CGI get a thumbs up. And 6 is rewatchability. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is 2.5 hours long. And while this movie stumbled a little bit in its first half, it really figured it out in the second half, and it made this movie not feel as long as it was. I thought this movie was a really good conclusion to the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy, and for me this movie felt a lot like old Marvel before Endgame and Infinity War, both in the way it carried itself and the way that you felt by the end of the film. Which made me excited because I haven't felt like that for a long time. The Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy is rock solid, and that's thanks in part to this movie. So for me, rewatchability gets a thumbs up. With all these areas considered, I have to give Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 an 8 out of 10. This movie stumbled a little bit in the first half, and there were moments that it tried to be funny, but seemed to get distracted from what you were actually there for, and it dropped the ball when it came to Adam Warlock. But it had great character development, a solid story, an excellent villain, a decent balance of humor and heartfelt moments, great action sequences, and a plot that led you to the end of the film feeling satisfied. I went into this movie with really high expectations, and while not perfect, I was definitely happy with what we got. So with that being said, I definitely think that Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is worth going to see in movie theaters, especially if you're a fan of the older Marvel films. Thank you so much for watching. If you've seen Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, please let me know what you thought about it in the comments below. As always, I appreciate your love and support, and I'll catch you guys and gals in the next one.